Thank you all for joining today to this session. It's going to be a recorded session, and it's very important that everyone has joined because we are having a crisis due to DDoS attacks rising in Europe. If you have any questions, feel free to write it in the chat, and we'll try to answer through the webinar or at least at the end. At this point, I would like to introduce myself and my colleague. I'm Matan Bernstein. I'm the channel director here at MazeBolt, and we have also Alon Yafe, who is our lead solution architect. Just before we begin, with one sentence, I'll explain who we are. So we are MazeBolt. We are a vulnerability management platform for DDoS. It allows you to test and simulate every type of DDoS attack against all your services, real DDoS attacks, and our experience is very vast, with more than 500,000 simulation hours throughout our day, throughout our time. And yeah, let's begin. So we see that in Europe, the number of DDoS attacks are surging. We see a lot of attacks happening against Swiss banks, Swiss governments, ministries in Italy, and airports in Italy. We see some of them are by pro-Russian groups, some of them are by other type of attack groups. We see that this is political, we see that it's social, we see that it could be a regular DDoS attack, it could be a ransom DDoS attack. For example, here we see a ransom DDoS attack against Migros Bank in Switzerland. We see that this is something that is happening all across Europe. Even big organizations such as MI6 and others can be obviously affected. So this is something that is just only from the last month, and it keeps on happening. So the latest trends in DDoS attacks that we see. So first of all, I just mentioned that we see a rising DDoS attack against Europe, but we see a specific focus on the financial sector and the government services. We see new type of hyper-volumetric attacks. The most largest one just recently was 5.6 terabits per second DDoS attack. It was obviously, we don't know who was the target at this point, but we know from Cloudflare that that's the size that they stopped. We see that a lot of the DDoS attacks that come are basically encrypted traffic. This overcomplicates the mitigation efforts for decrypting all the traffic. We see that even the most premium DDoS mitigations are able to be penetrated with successful downtime. We're talking about environments even with multiple protection layers, such as the CDN, ISP, scrubbing center, WAFs. So even though all of these mitigations exist, we still see successful DDoS attacks. Now, we also see a massive increase in layer 7 type of attacks, applicative attacks. And with the rise of IoT devices in the world, we also see a lot of vulnerabilities that are being used to infect with malware a lot of IoT devices and creating new vast botnets that are basically used to create those DDoS attacks. We see Mirai malware being very, very common now. So most people that I talk to, usually after suffering from a DDoS attack, when they try to see what they can do to stop it, so a lot of the times we see that they use geo-blocks or some other temporary workarounds. We see that they might buy additional solutions or increase the processing power of their services. They might change vendors and different mitigation vendors. They can outsource the mitigation to cloud providers and ISPs. And obviously, some of them are choosing to take more people in, to advise, to react, to put in the SOCs. And basically all of this method, these are things that have been tried before. And companies that keep on doing this without solving the real issue would just continue to suffer from DDoS attacks, because just throwing more money at the problem doesn't fix it, okay? So at this point, I would like to pass the pass it to Alon so we can drill down and deep dive into the attack groups and attack vectors that we see in the market today. Alon?
Thank you, Matan. It was very important to hear that. So here's a nice list of some of the groups we are following. See this large group of active attacking groups in the DDoS arena. And if we want to have a bit zoom in on the most, let's say, top 6 groups that are mainly active in the financial sectors, but also in governments and wealth and infrastructure and critical infrastructure. Obviously, we see the Killnet group and the Non-M57 and the Anonymous Sudan group, which in the last October of 2024 published that their leadership was arrested, but it was only part of the leadership because we see the group still active. And obviously we see here the Fancy Bear, which is also a pro-Russian group that is well known for attacking the financial sectors, mainly in Europe, but not only in Europe, but also in the USA. And eventually we see the Lazarus group and the Cyber Avenger groups, which are more like of state-sponsored, I would say, attacking group. But yet we see them also if they need the attacking banks and online e-commerce websites if needed. And let's talk a bit about most common DDoS vulnerabilities and what we see that we work with big enterprise organizations. Why do we see that they are most vulnerable to? So obviously, we still see the SYN floods and DNS floods and basically amplified UDP, multiple different of amplification UDP protocol still found to be vulnerable, as well as HTTPS flood. We see organizations are having a hard time to mitigate those floods as far as they can from the core servers, and eventually they have to do it inside some on-premise web application firewalls or IPS devices. And yet we still see the slow and low attacks are still vulnerable in that list. It's something that takes a lot of resources and consumes a lot of processing power on the server themselves, but also on the network devices. And then eventually, I would say SSL attacks, SSL-based attacks, for example, but not only limited to SSL renegotiation floods, right? Those kind of attacks that are extremely exhausting firewalls and load balancer, CPU power, and basically are able to bring down the entire organization. And by saying that, I want to show a little example that we obviously we saw with working with one of the organizations, but let's take it in a more, I would say, diagram level. So let's say, Matan, that I have 4 servers I want to protect, right? I have the VoIP server, email server, DNS server, and API web server, right? So obviously, I will have my web application firewall protecting my API server, right? And usually I will have some kind of load balancer in the network that splits all the traffic between the servers, between the different services I have. And I would like to have some kind of protection, like an IPS protection in the network, right? And also I will have like a firewall protection and also splitting the network into chunks. And eventually I would like to protect my firewall from DDoS attacks, right? Using my firewall as a line of DDoS mitigation is not best practice, is not recommended, but we see that's still happening. And soon we'll see why it's not a good practice. So I have my on-premise DDoS mitigation device over here, which protects my entire organization from DDoS attacks and especially from stateful devices such as firewalls and load balancers and IPS and WAFs. And then I have my edge router in my data center. And let's say I also have like a cloud-based DDoS mitigation service, right? Like a scrubbing center, for example, okay? And then I have my on-premise DDoS mitigation device being able to talk with my scrubbing center through a NetFlow protocol, right? So this is a common practice when we see a hybrid solution of DDoS protection in enterprise organizations, trying to address that as much as we can to our audience. And now, so I have my legitimate traffic coming in, but I also have my attacking traffic try to hit my service, right? So if everything goes well, it should be blocked in the scrubbing center. What's not been blocked in the scrubbing center later on should be blocked on my on-premise DDoS mitigation device, right? But let's say I forgot to add some policy or I added a new service, right? And I didn't configure my policy correctly or my settings correctly on my on-premise DDoS mitigation device. Next thing that will happen is that, for example, in this case, we're talking about a SYN flood. It will go directly to the firewall. Now the firewall needs to handle a SYN flood as a DDoS attack to protect the entire organization. So what happens in the background is that my firewall connection table starts to fill up with SYN packets, right? And then at some point, my firewall stops being available for legitimate requests. In that case, the entire services of the entire organization will go down, will be unavailable. This is why it's important to realize even a SYN flood, a small SYN flood can bring down my entire organization if I'm not configure my DDoS mitigation equipment correctly. And let's say someone tells me, listen, my firewall is very strong. I don't mind about SYN floods. So the next stop will be my IPS. Is that something that can be vulnerable to SYN flood? Or my load balancer? Think about what will happen if the load balancer get hit with a SYN flood. That's also a dangerous point. So I'll conclude that by saying it's all good and nice. You have the right DDoS mitigation services and products in your network protecting you. Now it needs to be very well understood to all the technical teams. We need to fine-tune them to work as the best way it can be to protect my online services from going down. And that leads us to the next slide. Why are DDoS attacks are so successful? The reason that we see it so successful right now, especially also in the financial market and the sector in Europe and USA, is because it's not the fact that they don't have DDoS mitigation services or equipment deployed. They do have it, but it's not well configured, and that leaves them exposed to DDoS vulnerabilities. What is DDoS vulnerability? Is the combination of attack vector and the target, an online publicly available target, and a port which is not configured to be protected correctly in the DDoS mitigation equipments, solutions, and services. So that's my key on this webinar. Now I'm going to hand it over back to you, Matan. Thank you.
Thank you, Alon. Very detailed, and I understand. Okay, so we have these vulnerabilities that they cause the DDoS to be successful. Okay, correct. So how did these vulnerabilities come to our mitigations? So basically, these vulnerabilities, they're not a software vulnerability. They're not a problem in the products that you guys are using. And basically, these are customization and configurations that are needed to be done when we deploy the mitigation solutions, like you would deploy any other type of cybersecurity solution. You would have to tweak it, you'd have to customize it, you have to configure it correctly to your traffic blend. Now, with DDoS, what happens is that these misconfigurations, they come out of the box. They are predefined policies and policies that don't necessarily fit the exact traffic blend, and they fit the services that our customers are providing their customers. And these misconfigurations basically are creating vulnerabilities. They are taking advantage. Those vulnerabilities are then taken advantage, and that's how a successful damaging DDoS attack is happening. Basically, the hackers, they know what vulnerabilities might exist. They know how they overcome them. And if you don't configure your devices correctly, then you're vulnerable. And what we see is that everyone is vulnerable, okay? And we see about 40% vulnerability from all the testing that we're doing. And this is very, very bad. Imagine you buy a mitigation solution that works only 60% of the time. Now we're talking about DDoS, we're talking about uptime and business continuity, and we want to ensure 100% uptime. And if we don't know what vulnerabilities we have, how are we going to close those vulnerabilities? So in order to actually see those vulnerabilities, we have to do some testing, okay? And the problem with DDoS testing is that it requires a maintenance window. Obviously, creating a DDoS attack against yourself during regular hours would impact the services you provide. So it has to be done through a maintenance window. another problem that we have, because it's during a maintenance window, it's not possible to test all the different sites and services within the organization. So we only handpick a few, and we can't do all of it. And if we are, checking some of the sites and services, we are limited to the amount of simulations that we can do. And we, for example, in our bank of attacks, we have more than 150 different types of attacks. So obviously, during one maintenance window, we cannot test all attacks against all services. This is something that is not possible. And another problem with the testing that is, up until today, usually companies are mandated to do a red team test or some pen test only once a year, twice a year, maybe quarterly, but this is what they're mandated to. And this creates a problem where not everyone is testing everything all the time. And if we follow Gartner and we look at CTEM in regards to external breach assessment, basically we need to make sure we test everything, okay? All layers of DDoS protection. In the DDoS space, we need to test everything, the CDN, the WAF, the on-prem device, the scrubbing center, our ISPs, everything that is protecting us from DDoS. Once we test everything, we can identify all those vulnerabilities and understand where our gaps are. Now, if we then tested and found all the vulnerabilities, we can finally begin to tweak and customize those systems according to our own requirements and necessity to our services. Now, it's good to fix those issues, but then we have to also test again to make sure that those vulnerabilities are actually closed, okay? So we're changing our approach from being a reactive approach, following a DDoS incident to throw money at the problem. We are changing the approach. We need to become more proactive, okay, to stop those DDoS attacks from happening in the first place. And the equipment that is out there, okay, the top mitigation vendors, they have great solutions. If only we would be able to tweak them, we would be able to ensure that the company that is using those mitigation solutions would have almost 100% resiliency completely in an automated way. That means no staff is needed, no incident response is needed, no post-attack analysis, and making sure that SLAs are being kept. So with this approach, we can basically avoid damaging DDoS attacks. So the next time you want to do anything in regards to preparation of DDoS, what you need to do, okay, you need to change the approach and take a proactive approach for DDoS. Make sure that you test and simulate your entire attack surface, every site, every facing service that you have, public facing to the internet, you need to test it. This will allow you to test all your mitigation vendors. It doesn't matter if it's the CDN, the scrubbing center, the WAF, or on-prem solutions. Everything needs to be tested and tweaked. Once we do that, we need to make sure we test with all the different vectors, not to leave any other vector unchecked. And this is something that needs to be done all the time, not just through specific maintenance windows and times that are, for a checkbox or something like that. This is something that needs to be continuously throughout the year tested. This way, we will avoid DDoS attacks. And what we see in Europe today is very troubling. Okay, we're talking about companies that are in the highest level of companies using the top vendors in the world, and they still go down. And it's not because they don't invest enough money or they don't put enough attention to this problem. It's because the methodology needs to be changed. We need to look at how Gartner and CTEM is now looking at things, and we need to take that DDoS sector and put that in the same methodology and change the reactive to proactive. That is the only way to avoid damaging DDoS attacks. Now, I don't need to explain you guys what damaging DDoS attacks might do to your company, but I urge you all to think about the worst case scenario that you can think of in case of a DDoS attack, because it might happen to you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but if the trend of DDoS is going to continue as it is, it will get to you, okay? So at this point, I know it was a very short webinar. We just wanted to stress the fact that there's a lot of issues now with DDoS. All of you have vulnerabilities. If you don't check them, you might get impacted. Now it's time for some questions over the chat. Let's see what we've got. And obviously, if you're interested in learning more, you can visit our website or contact any of us, and we can make sure that we provide you with some more additional details. So, Alon, I've got this question here. I think it might be for you. Can you give an example of a DDoS vulnerability that many companies overlook?
Yes. So I mentioned earlier about SSL-based attacks, and what we see, we need to understand, for example, an SSL renegotiation flood, what it actually doing. So it means like a lot of requests are reaching to an SSL offloading in the network, right? First of all. So what is an SSL offloading? It's entity in the network. It can be a load balancer, it can be a WAF, it can be like a packet burger, that its all job is to negotiate the SSL protocol between the user and before it gets the server, checks that everything is okay, and passing through the request to the server, sometimes encrypted, sometimes decrypted. And this is a process that takes a lot of CPU resources, right? So when someone attacks with that kind of attack that is using an old known SSL vulnerability in the SSL protocol of renegotiation, endless renegotiation of certificates and keys with the SSL offload point, that causes that point to be highly vulnerable for this attack. Its CPU gets high loaded, its RAM usage gets high loaded. And when that's happened, if that is a load balancer in the network, it's bad news to everyone, because now the load balancer is being, high loaded, needs to get a failover to its backup. And one thing that we saw in the past happening all the time when we did some red team testing, right, is that those kind of attacks are causing a lot of damage in the network because it's hard for the entities to block this attack if it's not well configured on the DDoS mitigation device. Now, the DDoS mitigation device does have this capability to face this attack and block it. But a lot of organizations, we see when we come to talk with the technical team, sometimes they're afraid to do those steps because they had like a bad past experience. We see that all the time. Once we start to work with them, we're able to move on to the next step. But yeah, I would say SSL-based attacks, definitely that's a use case. HTTPS floods, HTTP flood, right? If you have the equipment, just use it correctly. Don't just, I saw one customer had a couple of Radar devices, couple of F5 devices, didn't use it. Just use it for a load balancer, didn't use the WAF capability, didn't use these capabilities. And then they had a downtime due to a small, simple HTTP request. So just use your already existing devices instead.
So another question we have is, for example, we have so this customer is using cloud DDoS mitigation vendor and they have an SLA. Isn't that enough?
Well, using an SLA, sometimes you don't have any other option but use an SLA. But you need to make sure the SLA is good, and you can discuss that with the cloud DDoS mitigation vendor. You don't have to accept their default SLA as that's the only option. No, you need to check what is the normal SLA, what is the SLA accepted for you as organization for your services until, on a service until they get responded with the correct team. If it's not good for you, there are plenty of other DDoS mitigation vendors out there. You need to do this review. You need to ask them who gives you the best SLA. It's like a bidding, bidding process. And a good DDoS mitigation vendor, will do the maximum they can to minimize the SLA. Okay, so it's something you can negotiate.
Yeah. To be honest, we want to avoid SLA. SLA is when the things break down. It's a bit too late when you get to enforce the SLA.
I started by saying sometimes don't have the option.
Yeah. I'm just saying we want to be in a position where we don't need the SLA. Obviously, I'm not aware of any SLA that would compensate any customer for its downtime expenses and revenue loss and all that. We have another interesting question here. During a flood of UDP DNS attack, is it possible to block only malicious requests and permit legitimate requests? And how?
Yes, it's possible. There are several vendors of DDoS mitigation equipment that allows that. The question of how, well, we can take it offline, we can go over it together, but I'm just saying it's possible. We know of a couple of DDoS mitigation vendors that have the correct solution for that. It just need to be configured correctly per the domain you're using, per the network you're using. So how, it's the high general question, but if I want to answer that deeply, we need, to investigate and get a bit more details.
Yeah, feel free to reach after the webinar.
Yeah.
Okay, we have just a few more questions. Let's see. Okay, so which DDoS vendor is the best?
The golden question.
Yeah.
I told you that the DDoS mitigation that uses no, I'm just kidding. There is no best. I just say the following: all DDoS mitigation vendors have good technology. The question is what they are willing to do in order to make your online services up and running 24/7, and how are they service oriented for you. Okay, technology is good for all the vendors, but they need to be proactive. They need to fix the default templates of their services to make your services up and running.
Can you share about the process of how? Okay, let's say we have a vulnerability. We know about this vulnerability. These vendors, I don't have access to fix it. Who fixes it?
Right. I say that what they need to do, and you need to make sure that they are doing, is that they are constantly testing those settings in the networks and their DDoS mitigation capabilities and remediating them in a reasonable time, right? You mentioned earlier you don't want to have SLA, right? So if you don't want to have SLA, you need to make sure that your DDoS mitigation vendor is doing what needs to be done, is finding vulnerabilities, remediate those vulnerabilities, try to scan to see if there are new services, new API services, new web services, new DNS services for the customer that are available online, and make sure those services are well protected proactively. Okay, don't wait for someone else to discover that. If someone else discovering that, that's a whole different game. Now you really need to have an SLA.
Okay, great.
So approach, I would say.
Yeah, look, I think that this is enough for today. I think that people who are interested can obviously reach out to us and ask more about this. How do we solve this issue? But the most important thing I think to take from this is that we all have vulnerabilities and they exist, and some of them might be very major.
For sure.
The question is, how do we find them? And this is something that everyone needs to think about, what vulnerabilities they might have and how to find them. And to do this now before getting the DDoS attack, This
Indeed.
is what needs to be done.
I totally agree. Don't wait for someone else to find your vulnerabilities. Find it yourself and make sure to remediate them.
Yeah. And obviously, in cybersecurity today, we're talking about zero trust. So when companies are outsourcing their DDoS mitigation, they are basically trusting their mitigation vendors, which is okay to trust, but always verify and validate. And if you find something, you stress it out so they will fix it. And this is the methodology that needs to be done also on DDoS, not just on cybersecurity.
100%. I totally agree, and I think that's the important thing to do.
Okay. I see we don't have any more questions, and we reached the time. So I thank everyone for joining us. I hope you got what you were looking for from this session, and I don't want to see you guys getting impacted by DDoS. If anyone wants to contact us after this, you can go to our websites. Our LinkedIn pages are here. We are available to basically to provide you with additional questions and services and information. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend and don't suffer from DDoS. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, Alon.
Bye-bye.